going to do a couple Hanukkah songs. Let's have a party with all dance and roll. Gather round the table, give you a treat. Take us to play with the latkes and eat. While we are playing, candles are floating low. Wonderful each night that they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Wonderful each night that they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Do you know it? Hanukkah, lights on the menorah. Let's have a party with all that's the floor. Gather round the table, give you a treat. Draperies to play, lights to we are playing, the candles they're burning low. Wonderful each night that they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Wonderful each night that they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Hanukkah, oh Hanukkah, come light us the menorah. Let's have a party with all that's the Lord. Gather round the table, we'll give you a treat. Draperies to play with and latkes to eat. And while we are playing, the candles they burning low. Wonderful each night that they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Wonderful each night that they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago.
My brain is going.
My
Well,
husband
this is another one you probably don't know.
discovered a new trick.
Huh?
My husband has discovered a new trick.
Oh?
If he pounds on my back when I'm singing, it makes me sing funny. He thinks it's funny.
This is one that's taken me a while to learn because every time I've tried to learn it, I've found a different melody to part of it. So anyway, Sabbath, so. Seven, so, Hanukkah, Hanukkah, Seven, so, Hatzikah, Ula'am, Neskadol, Hayasham, Neskadol, Hayasham, Hatzikah, Ula'am.
You didn't see it?
Seven, so, Hanukkah, Hanukkah, Seven, so, Hatzikah, Ula'am, Neskadol, Hayasham, Neskadol, Hayasham, Hatzikah, Ula'am. And then there's an English version. I'm going to do this English version of it. It's not the direct translation, but that's okay, right? Sit and turn while the Hanukkah candles burn. What a beautiful holiday. Let's all eat and dance and play. Tell the story, chant the prayers. A great miracle happened there. It's the festival of lights. We'll be spinning for all 8 nights. Spin and turn while the Hanukkah candles burn. What a beautiful holiday. Let's all eat and dance and play. Tell the story, chant the prayers. Great miracle happened there. It's the festival of lights. We'll be spinning for all 8 nights. Now you guys learned a new Hanukkah song.
What?
Huh?
We were talking.
Yeah, so now you learned a new Hanukkah song.
For next
I
year.
knew Sevivon.
So for next year.
I looked at that on YouTube and thought, I should learn this thing. I said, no, I don't want to.
I wasn't paying attention. I was watching the ladies.
Blessed are you, Lord our God.
Okay, Chris, you know this one.
Eternal is holy King.
Oh,
We'll get serious now.
it was supposed to be this morning when I wasn't full.
We can do it too, Julia.
Oh, what?
Yes.
I see.
Just do what we do.
You get right in between them.
I'd be
Copy
scared.
No,
This
in
was
the
an easy
circle,
one.
Chris.
Honest is easy. You should just get right between them so you can watch who's never beside you. You just do
It's okay. It's okay if you make mistakes.
Later on, that's wrong key.
Okay, guys, we have to do like this. Change the key.
Blessed are you, O Lord our God, whose word brings on the evening. Baruch Adonai, Baruch, Le'olam Vaed. Baruch Adonai, Baruch, Le'olam Vaed. Thy wisdom, O Lord, heaven's gates open up with understanding. You order the seasons, creating day and night, turning darkness into light, arranging stars to your pleasing. Baruch Adonai, Baruch, Le'olam Vaed. Baruch Adonai, Baruch, Le'olam Vaed. Oh, blessed be the King, to the Holy One we sing. Lord of hosts is your name. Oh, ever-living God, rule over us, now and forever the same. Baruch Adonai, Baruch, Le'olam Vaed. Baruch Adonai, Baruch, Le'olam Vaed. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, eternity's holy King. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, whose word brings on the evening.
Hey, good job. See, you can do it.
Oh, we did good. We're gonna light the Hanukkah candles now. So traditionally we wear a head covering to light the candles. We don't absolutely have to, I don't believe, but we choose to, and it's the tradition. So we'll honor the tradition by doing so. And the first thing we do is we light the center candle, and then we say the blessings. I have mine.
Okay.
Geek out. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirshanu b'mitzvotav,
Was I supposed to do
v'tzivanu lehenech ner shel Hanukkah. Baruch atah Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and has commanded us to kindle the lights of Hanukkah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who performed miracles for our ancestors in those days, in this season. Kindle the lights.
The lights to remember
The miracles of long ago, the battles fought, the victories won, the enemies we overcome by your mighty hand. We kindle the lights to remember the martyrs of long ago, the women brave, the warriors true, took their stand and fought it through for your words commands. So burn the candles brightly, let the whole world know we identify with those of long ago. We are God's children, children of Abraham. Our adoption has been paid for by the blood of the Lamb. Our adoption has been paid for by the blood of the Lamb. We kindle the lights to remember the miracles of long ago. The battles fought, the victories won, the enemies we've overcome by your mighty hand. We kindle the lights to remember the martyrs of long ago, the women brave, the warriors true, took their stand and fought it through for your words commands. So burn the candles brightly, let the whole world know we identify with those of long ago, and we are God's children, the children of Abraham, and our adoption has been paid for by the blood of the Lamb. Our adoption has been paid for by the blood of the Lamb. Like the candles, burn them bright, let them shine into the night. Like the candles, make it clear his return is drawing near, and he will come to light the way, to turn our darkness into day, and he will shine for all to see. Messiah's come for you and me. Light the candles, burn them bright, let them shine into the night. Light the candles, make it known that we are his very own. And he has come to light the way, to turn our darkness into day. Praises rising, eyes are turning to you. We turn to you. Hope is stirring, hearts are yearning for you. We long for you. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come have your way among us. We welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Hear the sound of hearts returning to you. Return to you. In your kingdom, broken lives are made new. You make us new. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away. They're washed
Sing it
away.
like this.
Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come have your way among us. Welcome you here, Lord Jesus. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. In your presence, all our fears are washed away. When we see you, and when we see you, we find strength to face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come have your way among us. We welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Hosanna.
do it when I lived here.
My rhythm on it is still learning, but that's okay. I have this tendency with some of these songs I get started and I just want to, I get going too fast. It's like, I gotta
It's
stop.
easy to do.
It's easy to do it. It's natural sometimes. And
Yeah, I get that.
I love worship.
I know I do too. Tevet is the 10th month on the Jewish calendar if we're counting from the sun. It's the 4th of the civil calendar if you count from Tishri. But the name Tevet actually means 10. It's a Babylonian word and it means 10. So it is the 10th month. We get its name from that counting. And
Sorry, I have a question. You mean
Yes.
10th from Passover? You
Yes.
must mean, okay.
not Passover, but yeah.
Not
the month
from,
of Passover. So
So
it's-
it's Teruah, so,
No, from Yom Teruah it's the 4th.
alright.
So the civil calendar starts in September. It's September this year. Sometimes it's August. Anyway, Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah. That's the civil calendar. Tevet is the liturgical calendar or the calendar of the temple itself. And so it's kind of like we have school calendars and a yearly calendar. It's just a different, it's a different way of counting the time. And it's the 10th month from Passover. It shares a root word with the Hebrew word tov, which is the word for good. Tov means good. And so the Tevet, the 10th month, is supposed to be a good month. Isn't that a nice idea? Yeah, we'll have to get back to that. The month begins with the last couple days of Hanukkah as we lit the Hanukkah candles tonight. It always begins on this particular day of Hanukkah. And the nice thing about that is recognizing that as we are lighting candles, we have an increasing light that's going into this month. And we need to always remember the light of the menorah, the light of the candles that shines the light into the darkness, the story of the power of good over evil, that God will give victory to his people. We have to remember that. It's important to remember this month. Tevet is mentioned in the Bible in the book of Esther. And somebody has the book of Esther, verses 2 through chapter 2, verse 15 to 17. Who has that?
When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go to the king, she did not ask for anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the guardian of the women, advised. And Esther won favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Then Esther was taken to the king at his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the other virgins. So he placed the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
Okay, so in this month, Esther was brought to the king, and I want you to think about this. Esther had been taken in to the palace. She'd been taken into the harem. She'd been taken in for this great beauty contest for the king to select from one of these multiple women who his wife was going to be, who was going to be the next queen. And it wasn't necessarily a good thing to be selected for that. I know a lot of, we've talked about it as a beauty pageant and, all this hype and stuff, but if you really think about it, to be rounded up off the street and thrown into the harem, and you're never going to get to leave again. You're not going to get to see your family again. You're stuck. You're there.
Even when you're not selected?
Even if you're not selected, once you've been with the king, you're there. Period. You belong to him. You become his servant or his slave. So it's not necessarily a good thing to be brought in. Yeah, we, before we saw
Princess Bride.
Princess Bride, last week we went and we saw, what's the name of it?
It's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it is. Anna and the King.
And
The
from
King and
Anna
I.
The King and I. We saw The King and I on the big screen. And there's a scene in The King and I, there's a scene in this where a girl is brought to him and she's a gift from another country. She's a gift. She belongs to him. It's the same thing with these girls as they were being rounded up. They now belong to the king. They belong to the palace. They're not going to be allowed to leave. All of them. All of them. And so it's not necessarily a good thing to have been chosen. And in fact, in Jewish folklore and Jewish understanding, Esther was not just the cousin of Mordecai, but she was to have been his wife.
Oh.
They had not gotten married yet, but she was to have been his wife. And so here he has taken in this young woman who is an orphan, and he's going to marry her, raise her into this status place, and she gets taken before that could happen. And in fact, in some of the literature, it is said that they had a deep, abiding love for one another, and this literally ripped them apart. It's a total change in the story, isn't it? It's not a wonderful thing to have been pulled into the king. It wasn't a beautiful thing. But God chose her and allowed the king to choose her. And in the month of Tevet, all of that pays for itself in a sense, because she gets raised up to be the queen. He loves her. He chooses her. And God puts her in position so that 6 years later, when Haman decides to destroy the people, she's in the right place at the right time to bring salvation to her people. And it started in the month of Tevet for her. The month of Tevet. That happened on the first day of Tevet. Other historical things that happened during the month of Tevet, on the 8th of Tevet, this is the date, and it's, by the way, considered a voluntary fast day. It's considered a sad day, but it's the date that King, and I can't even pronounce it, Ptolemy, P-T-O-L, huh?
Ptolemy?
Yeah. 3rd century before Christ. He was a Greek king. He gathered 72 of the elders of Israel, 72 Jewish teachers, put them in 72 separate chambers, so they were all by themselves, each one in a separate place. And he told them, each one individually, write for me the Torah of Moses, your teacher, and put it in Greek. Write it in Greek. So 72 people, each given a scroll, each being told to translate or write a Hebrew book into Greek. Now, if you know anything about translation, if you've ever been around translators, what usually happens, and I've seen this happen more than once, you get translators that are going to disagree on what word to use. Because different words have different meanings in some ways. And sometimes one translator will pick one meaning over another one. And you can, if you're talking to someone through a translator, you might have someone else say, well, I wouldn't have chosen that word, right? You don't, several words have multiple meanings or multiple little nuances. And so the translation may be different depending on who's done studying, right? Well, here's the miracle that happened. Each one wrote it identically to the others. So that all 7, and that's a miracle. All 72 of them translated the Hebrew into Greek using the exact same words in Greek. That doesn't happen except for God. And you would think that would be a day to celebrate, right? God's word has now been put into the language of the common people, but actually, it's a day of mourning and fasting, because when we learn Hebrew, we learn all the different nuances of the words that are used. We learn the different levels of meaning of the words. We learn that each letter has a meaning. So the words have meanings, the letters have meanings. There's multiple layers of meaning in the Hebrew that as soon as you translate it into a common language, you have lost those meanings. And you've lost the ability to know those meanings unless you learn the Hebrew and you go back to the Hebrew. So it's actually a day of mourning. And it's a fast day for some as they mourn the fact that God's word got locked or frozen into one interpretation when it was translated into the Septuagint. And yet it was still a miracle, was it not? Do you really think this guy wanted the word of God? Or do you think he was putting them all to a test? So that he could have a reason to slaughter them all. You know, honestly, he wasn't a good guy. He wasn't wanting the word of God. And God did a miracle, and they all wrote it the same. But because it's considered an attempted assimilation or an attempt to turn God into a common language, to take God out of his language and put it into the Greek language, totally shifts some things and some meanings. And that's part of why I'm trying to learn Hebrew, so I can understand some of those meanings better. That's on the 8th of Tevet. That's a voluntary fast day for those who choose to fast. The 9th of Tevet is also a voluntary fast day for people who want to fast, because that is the day that Ezra the scribe and Nehemiah the prophet, the one who wrote the book Nehemiah, both died on that day in the same year. They had faithfully led Israel coming back from the Babylonian captivity. It is said that the eyes of everyone in Israel was clouded because of their death. The loss of their leaders, the leadership was so great.
Nehemiah,
Pardon?
Nehemiah, and Grisha.
Ezra. Ezra the scribe. Ezra, one of the greatest teachers Israel ever had, second only to Moses. In fact, it's kind of one of those things that it said is if God had not given the Torah through Moses, he would have given it through Ezra. That's just one of the things they say. That's about how much the respect and the great respect they have for the teacher Ezra, the scribe. They both died on the 9th, and that is a voluntary fast day. So now you have the 8th is a voluntary fast day, a day of mourning. The 9th is a voluntary fast day, a day of mourning. And the 10th, that's not a voluntary fast day, that's an obligated fast day in Israel, because that is the day that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, first laid siege to Jerusalem. That's the day he surrounded Jerusalem to take it. Now, it took 30 months. 30 months, that's a long time that he had circled the city and sat there with his army. The army stayed around that city of Jerusalem for 30 months. That's how long it took for them to run out of food. That's a long time. That's how long it took for all that to take place. 30 months later, on the 17th of Tammuz, he breached the walls of Jerusalem. And 10 days after that, on the 9th of Av, the temple was destroyed, as was the whole of the city, burned down. But on the 10th of Tevet, Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. And so there's a fast on that day. So now you got 3 fast days in the month. One right after the other, right? And what's interesting is, with the exception of the last 2 days of Hanukkah, there are no other special days in the month of Tevet. There's no other holidays, there's no other festivals, none of it, just the fast days, the days of fasting. It's actually a dark month. It's a heavy month. It's a difficult month. It's the first month of the winter season, which is 3 months, Tevet, Shabbat, and Adar. Those 3 months are all winter. And Tevet is where the winter really starts to dig in and set in, or become in place in Israel. So it wouldn't be surprising if it didn't snow in Jerusalem sometime during the month of Tevet. If it's going to get cold, if there's going to be a wind and ice storm, it happens during this month. During this month. The tribe that's associated with this month, every month has a tribe associated with it. And so as we go through the months, we learn about the different tribes also, the different tribes of Israel. And the month of Tevet is associated with the tribe of Dan. And the name Dan means judge. And it's as if every winter comes the opportunity to judge. To judge. When it gets cold, when it gets hard, we can judge our carnal nature and we can have good self-control, or we can let it get out of hand. And we'll learn a little bit more of that in a minute. The tribe of Dan. Dan is the firstborn son to Bilhah, who is Rachel's handmaid, or Rachel's servant, who has Genesis 31 through 6. Tells about his birth.
Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister. And she said to Jacob, give me children or else I'll die. So Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? She said, here is my maid Bilhah. Go in to her, that she may bear on my knees, that through her I too may have children. So she gave her maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me, and has indeed heard my voice, and has given me a son. Therefore she named him Dan.
She named him Dan, meaning God judged on her side. It was a surrogate motherhood situation. It's the way they did that, so that she could have a child. She named him Dan. Genesis 49, 16 through 18 is where Jacob, his father, gives his blessing over Dan. So that's Genesis 49, 16 through 18.
Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a vapor along the path that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider tumbles backward. I look for your deliverance, Lord.
So his name is Dan, which means to judge. And his father gives him a blessing that says, you will be a judge, and you will judge your brothers. You will judge the tribes. And then it says that Dan will be a serpent beside the road, who strikes the horse's heels so the rider falls backwards. You know, I'll explain that in a little bit and how it actually applies to a situation, but the idea is that Dan doesn't have to attack the rider, who's the enemy. He just makes him fall off the horse. Yeah, it's kind of a different way of doing battle, but that's what it's saying about him. That Dan is not going to have to go directly after the enemy, but instead he will go after that which the enemy rides in on, and then the enemy will fall. It's an interesting idea. Dan will judge the tribes, and we'll see that there are several of the judges, when we read in the book of Judges, that come from the tribe of Dan, but there's one in particular we're going to talk about. When Moses blessed the tribe, he gave him a different blessing. That's Deuteronomy 33:22.
And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp that leaps forth from Bashan.
Very short, very simple. Dan is like a lion that jumps out, leaps out of the Bashan. Okay? He's going to jump, he's going to be a warrior. And he's going to judge. The tribe of Dan is represented usually by two possible different emblems. One is the scales. If you go over to Tammy's place where she's meeting, you'll see the tribal banners, and she has the scales on the one for Dan. A set of scales, the right judgment, right? To the balancing. But there's also quite often on the scales a serpent or a snake coming up because of the word that said it's going to be like a serpent. So it can be represented by the scales or by a snake. And I always thought, well, why not by the lion? But he's not.
Because he's too fierce.
Huh?
So you might be
Because that's Judah. Judah is the lion, actually, and I think it's because they don't want to take away from Judah. That's a good idea, though. Dan will be a serpent on the way. When we look at the tribe of Dan through history and legend, we see a very mixed story. Janie said someone was telling her he thinks that she's from the tribe of Dan because she does these beautiful banners and things and beautiful sign, and these candle slips, I guess you'd call them, Janie made for me on there. So the Hanukkah candles are in a jar, and she did that. She sewed it beautiful. She decorates beautifully. And there were two people that are talked about in Scripture. One is Oholiab, and he's mentioned in the book of Exodus, and he's a craftsman of the tabernacle. He is one that puts together the curtain that is in the tabernacle with his sewing and with his skill at making the embroidery perfect and beautiful. He's from the tribe of Dan. We have another one, Huram Abi. He's a master craftsman in Solomon's temple, and he's talked about in 2 Chronicles, where he did the same thing his ancestor did, and he helped to make the curtain and the tapestries with beautiful weavings. A craftsman, beautiful, dedicated, given to the service of the Lord. It would be nice if the whole tribe was like that, but they're not. Before David became king, before Saul became king, Israel was judged by different judges and prophets that were the leaders of the people. Dan is reflected fairly frequently in the book of Judges by someone who is a judge. Most of them are not particularly good judges. They're not particularly righteous men. The one we know most about, and the one most of us know of, is the judge, the prophet, Samson. Remember the story of Samson? Israel gets united underneath Samson's leadership. Samson brings in retribution. Samson does all kinds of cool things. And in the very end, he brings down the Philistines without touching a single one. Without touching it, just like I talked about the biting the heel of the horse, having the rider fall. Well, we'll read about that. Who has... I'm not there yet. Samson, by the way, is a product of the union between Dan and Judah. The tribe of Judah is represented by the lion. The tribe of Dan also has a lion in it. Samson's father, Manoach, was from the tribe of Dan. His mother, Yehuda, was from the tribe of Judah. So he's rather unique in that. The tribe of Dan was given land to settle. It was between two rivers. It was fertile. It was rich. It was wonderful land. But the Philistines had come in and set up cities there. And the Philistines are a very fierce group of warriors. They were a migratory group, so they traveled and would settle for a while and then move, and settle for a while and move. Well, they had settled for a while in Israel, and they were very fierce, and they were very cruel, and they terrorized Israel. Samson was one of the judges that was brought up against them. Let's read about his miraculous birth in Judges 13, verses 3 to 5, because he was born from a miraculous situation. Judges 13, 3 to 5.
And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, although you are barren, having borne no children, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, or to eat anything unclean, for you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor is to come on his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth. It is he who shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines.
What a promise. An angel comes and shows and talks to her. The angel ends up talking to her husband as well, and sharing with them that this son, this child they're going to have, is a special child, and this child is supposed to be dedicated to God from the day he's born. He's not supposed to have any wine, no grape product, nothing from the vine, fruit of the vine. He's not supposed to drink any strong drinks, so no alcohol. He's not allowed to drink any alcohol. And he's not supposed to cut his hair. That is what a Nazarite does, or someone who takes what's called the Nazarite vow, a special vow of dedication, to where they should be like the priests in the temple, where they are serving only God. So that's what he's supposed to be, and that's what he's supposed to do from the day he's born. If you read the story, chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16, what we find out is that Samson broke every one of those vows. one by one. One by one. He allowed himself to get drunk. He allowed himself to eat unclean meat. He allowed himself to touch a dead body, a carcass, and to eat honey out of the carcass the bees had made. That was totally a violation of the Nazirite vow. All of these are violations of the Nazirite vow. And the very last one that he broke, know the story of Delilah, right? Where Delilah cuts his hair, where he tells her his strength is in his hair finally. So she cuts his hair and his strength is drained from him. I personally believe the reason his strength was drained is because this is the last of the vows that he has broken before God. A whole series of vows that he broke. He broke before God. He did not take care of what he desired. He went after what he was not supposed to go after. He let his flesh take over. And the very last vow was the one of the hair. Don't let a razor touch his head. She cut his hair off. He lost all his strength. They made him into a servant. Well, worse than that. They maimed him. They beat him. They tied him up. They threw him in prison. They blinded him. It wasn't really nice what they did. Like I said, they weren't nice people. They were very cruel and ruthless. And the day came that they let him, that he decided that he was going to get even. They brought him out to make fun of him. They brought him into the temple of Dagon, who was their god, a multiple-story building with pillars. And he asked the person who brought him in to put him up against the pillars in the center of the temple because he wanted to feel them. And he put his hands on the pillars and he said, God, just this once, one more time, let me die with them if you have to, but just this once. Return my strength. Show your strength, God. And he pushed the pillars. The pillars came down, collapsed on the building, and those who were making fun of him, who were mocking God, died. Unfortunately, so did he. He wasn't exactly a stellar example of a judge or a prophet, was he? And yet, in the end, he turned back to God and he said, God, you do it. After he died, the tribe decided they'd had enough of trying to fight the Philistines. They decided that they couldn't do it. They weren't going to be able to. And they thought that they should find another place to live because they couldn't conquer the Philistines. Judges chapter 18 tells us how the tribe ventures out to find a safer territory, easier to handle. Who has Judges 18, 1 through 5? We're going to read a little bit of this story.
In those days there was no king of Israel. And in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in. For until that day an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. So the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of their whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said to him, Go, search the land. And he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. When they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned aside there and said to him, Who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here? He said to them, Thus and so has Micah done to me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest. They said to him, Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we are going will be prosperous. The priest said to them, Go in peace. Your way in which you are going has the Lord's approval.
First of all, this is a priest who is not functioning in the temple. He's hired. And he bows down to an idol. Do you think they should have listened to him? Judges 18, verses 7 through 13.
Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people who were in it living in security, after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure, for there was no ruler humiliating them for anything in the land, and they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. When they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, "What do you report?" They said, "Arise, and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you sit still? Do not delay to go. Enter to possess the land. When you enter, you will come to a secure people with a spacious land, for God has given it into your hand, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth." Then from the family of the Danites from Zorah and from Eshtaol, 600 men armed with weapons of war set out. They went up and camped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they called that place Mahanadan to this day. Behold, it is west of Kiriath Jearim. They passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah.
So they'd been to this house before. They'd met the guy that had been hired as a priest. And what they do is they steal him now. And they steal the gods from the house. And then they go on. Judges 18, verses 27 through 31.
Then they took what Micah had made and the priests who had belonged to him, and came to Laish, to a people quiet and secure, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire. And there was no one to deliver them, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. And it was in the valley which was near Beth-Rahab. And they rebuilt the city and lived in it. And they called the name of their city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born in Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. And the sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's graven image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was at Shiloh.
So the house of God is in Shiloh, which isn't that far away, but they set up their own temple anyway. They set up their own place of worship. They didn't stay and fight for their own territory because the Philistines were too hard. What they did was they went out and stole what was not theirs from people who were peaceful. They were not people God had said to go up against. After the kingdoms divided after the reign of Solomon, the tribe of Dan ends up as part of the northern kingdom. So you have the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. King Jeroboam was afraid that his people would go down to Jerusalem to worship, and so he set up his own altars. He set up his own days of worship. He just did everything his own way. As far as I'm concerned, he was the first pope, in a sense. He set up they changed the days of worship, set up their own festivals, set up their own places to worship, their own ways of worshiping. And one of the places he set it up, first was in Bethel, and then in the north in Dan. And he put a golden calf in each of those locations.
Who did?
Jeroboam, the king, in 1 Kings.
Right.
1 Kings. So what we see in these stories is that the tribe of Dan, yes, there were some good people out of the tribe of Dan, but they rose up as individuals. The tribe of Dan as a whole, they were among the first in Israel to fall into idolatry. They were among the first in Israel to go and commit war crimes, basically, which they weren't supposed to do. They weren't exactly the greatest. They're not the greatest example for us. In fact, they're a really good example of what not to do, what not to be. And if you go to the book of Revelation where it lists the 12 tribes, and it lists those who are represented, the tribe of Dan is not listed there. It's not listed there. It gets dropped. Manasseh and Ephraim are counted instead. Tribe of Dan is not listed. But that doesn't mean that God hasn't made promises regarding even the tribe of Dan, because even the tribe of Dan, in their disobedience, are still sons of Israel, right? They're still sons of Abraham. Who has Isaiah 49, verses 14 through 16? Promises of God.
But Zion said, Adonai has forsaken me. Adonai has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her nursing baby, or lack compassion for a child of her womb? Even if these forget, I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. Your children will come quickly. Your destroyers and devastators will go away from you.
That's verses 22 and 23 of Isaiah 49.
Thus says the Lord God, behold, I will lift up my hand to the nations and set up my standard to the peoples, and they will bring your sons in their bosom, and your daughters will be carried on their shoulders. Kings will be your guardians, and princesses your nurses. They will bow down to you with their faces to the earth and lick the dust of your feet. And you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hopefully wait for me will not be put to shame.
All who wait for God will not be put to shame. That is a promise. I think sometimes when we enter into months like this, we really need to remember the promises of God. It's a dark month. It's a hard month. There's testing in this season. But if we remember the lights of Hanukkah, remember the light that shined into the darkness, and we keep our focus on God and not let it get distracted by enemy, not look the other direction, not set up false idols, keep our eyes on God, remembering that He is the one that triumphs light over darkness. He is the one. Remember, I mentioned this morning that there actually is another story about oil and about light that parallels the story of Hanukkah. And it's 30 days, it happened 30 days after Hanukkah, well actually several years before, but 30 days in terms of the month's calendar. On the 25th of Tevet, there was a group of people that were around Israel that did not like Israel. They wanted permission from Alexander the Great warrior, the great Greek leader. They sought permission from him to destroy Jerusalem, specifically to destroy the temple. And he kind of gave him permission, but he said, I'm coming, so hold off till I get there. And then we will do it. We'll destroy it. Well, they came and they told Shimon Hadzadik, or Simon the Zadok, Simon the Righteous. He was the high priest in Israel at the time, and he was a man who was true to God. And he put on his garments, his full garments as high priest, and he took torches, and he lit from the menorah those torches, and with a delegation of other priests dressed in their garbs, with their torches lit from the light of the menorah, they went out to meet Alexander the Great, this king who was coming to destroy them, this general who was going to run over the city. And they went out in the full garment, and they went forward, and they started at night, and they kept going, and they walked through the night, and their torches stayed lit. They didn't have to renew the light. And when dawn came, Alexander saw them from far away and asked, so who are these people? And the people he was with, the ones that wanted to destroy him, said, these are those awful Jews that are rising up against you. See, they're coming at you with torches. And he looked at him, and he continued going. And when the sun came up in full and shined on Simon the Zadok, the righteous high priest. Alexander stopped his horse, got off his horse, and bowed to the ground in front of him.
Woo.
And his soldiers were like, "What are you doing? Are you kidding me? What are you doing?" And Alexander the Great said, "Every time I get ready to go out to war, I have a vision. I see this man. This man goes before me into battle, and I win." And Simon the Zadok, the high priest, says, "Maybe it's because I pray for you. In our temple, I pray for you, that the great God will protect you, for you are a wise man." And Alexander was a very wise man. And he left, and he let them stay. In fact, he put up a guard around them. And Israel was the only nation, as long as Alexander was alive, as long as Alexander the Great was alive, Israel was the only nation that he conquered that did not have to set up temples to his gods. It was the only one. It was after he died that his generals divided the kingdom and changed that in Israel. And then we ended up with Hanukkah and the story of it.
When the kings and queens of England are crowned, at least in somewhat recent centuries, they play a piece about Zadok, the priest. Fabulous. You can hear it on the internet.
Zadok, it means righteous one. There's a story told about Simon the Zadok that as long as he was the high priest, when he lit the menorah, he would light the westernmost candle first. That's the direction of Greece from Israel. The westernmost candle first, and then he would light the rest. They would all burn. They all had the same amount of oil. All the others would go out, be gone in the morning or the next day, except for the westernmost candle, which stayed lit the whole time. That's one of the miracles that took place when Simon the Zadok was the high priest. He prayed for the Western nations. He prayed for the Greek kings. He prayed for the world, not just his own people. And God honored him. And when God's light was carried from the temple by a righteous man, it saved the city. And Alexander the Great, even one who bowed to other gods, bowed down before the light of God. And I think that's a phenomenal truth that we have to recognize, that if we are righteous and we carry the light, even your enemies will be at peace with you. That's what the Bible says. He will make even your enemies be at peace with you if we will carry the righteousness of God and shine his light. And how do we do that? Well, there's only one real way we can do that, and that is through our Messiah. Through our Messiah. The month of Tevet always begins on the 7th, as the 7th day of Hanukkah begins. 7 is the perfect number. It is the number of perfection. It is the number that represents the Spirit of God, but it is also the number of Messiah. And Messiah is what we need, and Messiah is how we walk in the world. Who has Colossians chapter 1, verses 12 through 20. We're just going to read it straight. Colossians 1, 12 through 20. And see what Messiah does for us. Oh, I have that one. I kept that one. Jeez, really good. Colossians chapter 1, beginning in verse 12. Shaul, Paul writes, "We give thanks to the Father who qualified you to share in the inheritance of the kingdom in the light. He rescued us from the domain of darkness He brought us into the kingdom of the Son whom he loves, in whom we have redemption, the release of sin. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, the seen and the unseen, whether thrones or angelic powers or rulers or authorities, all was created through him and for him. He exists before everything, and in him all holds together. He is the head of the body, his community. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in all things. For God was pleased to have him in all his fullness. God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, making peace through the blood on his cross, whether things in heaven or the things on earth or things in heaven. Once you were alienated from God and hostile in your attitude by your wicked deeds, but now he has reconciled you in Messiah's physical body through death to present you holy, spotless, blameless in his eyes. Through Yeshua, through Messiah, we can shine to the world. Just like Simon the Zadok brought the light from the temple, if we will bring the light out that we know that we have, God will make a way. He will make it work. Samson let his lust pull him away. The tribe of Dan looked for the easy way out. They lost their focus. They went after other gods. We don't have to do that. We can be like Simon the Zadok. We can be like the two men who helped sew in the temple and in the tabernacle. We can keep our eyes on the light, on Yeshua. May it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, that you inaugurate this month of Tevet on us for goodness and blessing. May you give us a long life, a life of peace, of shalom, a life of goodness, tovah, a life of blessing, bracha, a life of sustenance, parnasah, a life of physical health, hilutz adzamot, a life in which there is fear of heaven and a fear of sin, a life in which there is no humiliation, a life of wealth and honor, a life in which we will have a love of Torah and awe and reverence for God, a life in which Adonai, the Lord, fulfills our heartfelt requests for good. And we're going to do one more song.
That Colossians passage, I think, is one of the crowning jewel passages of all.
You're going to take that.
And what a thing to read at Hanukkah.
He is the light, and we reflect his light. So let's do We Are a Reflection. This is another one of those songs that we are a reflection to a world that is dying. We need to show his love and his care. We are a reflection to a world that is crying. time to blow the shofars and seal the word. And begin, declare the month has begun.